Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session of Macmillan Education Time. I can see lots of people already. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're doing well. All right. I'm here reading the comments. Oh, someone know each other probably. So happy to see that. Welcome to today's sessions. I don't really want to steal your time. Today's session will be Macmillan Education Time about social-emotional learning, and we'll be hearing from our fantastic teacher trainer, Julie Wallis, that I welcome here with me.
Thank you.
Hello, Julie. How are you?
Hello, Romina. Fine, thank you. And you?
I'm very, very good. Thanks. Julie is a fantastic teacher trainer, director of the London School, president of Isley. So I'm sure that she will talk about lots and lots of interesting things with you today. And the topic will be social emotional learning. So extremely important nowadays. I just would like to remind you one very, very quick thing. I'll switch to Italian for a second just to give you the technical bits, and then Julie will be all yours. Ancora grazie mille per essere qui oggi. Volevo ricordarvi semplicemente la questione degli attestati, quindi per chi dovesse richiedere l'attestato è necessario andare su mondadorieducation.it/attestati e lo troverete nella vostra sezione una volta terminato il webinar. Per chi vedrà questo evento in differita, invece, l'attestato sarà disponibile comunque, ma solo per coloro che avranno effettuato l'iscrizione, quindi l'accesso tramite mail di conferma, prima della mezzanotte di oggi. So, this is just a little bit in Italian for the technical parts. So, thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy, and I'll be here for anything if you need me, Julie. And I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's hope I can bring up the slides. One moment. Thank you. So now I don't know if it's me controlling them or somebody else. Okay. So thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. I've already been introduced a little bit, but I think what Romina forgot to say is I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher at heart, like all of you. And when anybody asks me, what do you do? I don't say things like president of Isley or I own my own language school. I always answer, I'm a teacher, because that's what I feel I am. And that's what we're about to talk about, feelings and emotions, and how we can use feelings and emotions in the classroom to help our learners become successful. So I actually don't know. Yes, I am in charge of the slides. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about a humanistic approach to teenagers, but using social and emotional learning. I hope that you will understand that I'm peppering. That means giving a little of at every slide of my own experience, and I'm sure you have experience to share too. So I will be giving you moments where I'll ask you to comment. Perhaps you have some ideas too. So we'll start with what is social and emotional learning, or SEL. It's not just a buzzword. It's not just the in word. It's here to stay, as was CLIL. We're still going with CLIL. It isn't over yet. It's a critical part of shaping the holistic development of young individuals, and it can be integrated into any kind of classroom. So it doesn't have to be a language classroom. It could be a science classroom or a maths classroom. And although I'll be talking mainly about teenagers and perhaps pre-teens, 12, 13-year-olds in my talk, The principles of social and emotional learning apply to everybody, so adults and younger learners as well. So I'm going to try and give examples from my own teaching and learning context as we go along. And although I have my own school, a lot of the teaching and learning that we do is off-site and in state schools. So most of the examples I give you will be things that really happened to me in state schools and the results that were achieved. So we know it's about holistic development, and we know it encompasses the skills that are needed to manage emotions and set goals, show empathy, build relationships, make responsible decisions. Well, that all has something to do with SEL. But we're going to look at things in detail, and then so if you like, I'm going to unpack them and then put them all together again. So the first thing I wanted to say is when we are talking about social and emotional learning, we are particularly talking about the way we teach in a classroom. And we're also talking about the materials and activities that we use in our classrooms. So before I continue with the slides, I wanted to say it's very important that we consider how we design our materials and the activities. And we have to ask ourselves, will they engage students at an emotional level? That means looking at the materials you have in front of you. You may be given a course book, for example, and adapting those materials to suit your learners' needs. It doesn't mean opening the same course book in different classrooms at page 20 and asking learners to look at exercise 1. That's very, very different. And I don't like to use the word excellence, but let's talk about good practice when we're teaching. So good practice means you are considering your learners and their needs. And their needs may also be emotional and social needs. And of course, if we're teaching language, the social aspect is very, very important. Don't worry, Valeria, welcome anyway. I see some of you have come in late because you were still working. The life of a teacher, huh? So as I go through, think about that. The materials you use, the activities you design will be adapted to the learners in your classrooms. They cannot be a book that you are given. But I'm not saying at all, don't use a book. I'm saying adapt the book to make it personal for you, the teacher, and personal to the learners too, to make it an emotional learning journey. So the first problem we have is understanding teenagers. You know, what are the characteristics of teenage development? And I know we have to think about age here. If we're looking at 12, 13, 14-year-olds, we're still in what I call the smelly age, when the hormones are going everywhere and they're still developing and trying to understand themselves. So a teenager of 17 or 18 will be completely different and will already be focusing on the results of their last year at school. Or if they're in a school where they finish learning at 18, they're going to be thinking about their results that year. So it's a completely different mindset. And we need to understand the mindset at each level. And of course, most teachers do understand that. But I do believe that the need for a supportive approach in teenage years has become more important since and during COVID. So I'm going to start with one example from my own learning experience, where I was working in a class at the top of a mountain near me. You can see that I live at the bottom of a mountain from the picture behind me. I live quite near the Asiago Plateau. And I was in a classroom with about 20 young people, all 13 going on 14, last year of middle school. The students were asked to give a mini presentation that they'd worked on in small groups, collaborative learning, and they were able to choose something they were interested in from their community and their environment. So they were well prepared. It wasn't too difficult, although it was a second language. But one girl, every time she was asked to do anything, her eyes welled up and tears started rolling down her cheeks. And she was suffering, as I believe many students do and did during COVID and still do. She was suffering from panic attacks. Now, I think that the problem here is this student needed to feel safe, to feel able to make mistakes, and to feel absolutely supported. So in this case, I took the girl out of the classroom and I taught her to breathe properly, simply to breathe and focus on herself. And then I gave her a choice. Choice, as you'll see later, is very important if you're applying a humanistic approach. You can go back in and give the presentation or not. It's entirely your decision. If you want, I will stand next to you. She walked back into the classroom, over to her friends, and gave her little presentation. And of course, the class were clapping and cheering at the end. They were all rooting for her. I still want to cry when I tell you this, because the change from then on in that girl and the way she learnt and the way she developed was enormous, because we'd helped her overcome a serious problem, a serious challenge. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, because we all know that teaching jobs, to be a teacher, is possibly amongst one of two of the most difficult jobs in the world. Perhaps a doctor would have a difficult job too, or a surgeon. But I actually think that teaching is one of the most rewarding, but the most difficult jobs in the world, because we're not focusing on one person, but 20, sometimes 30, sometimes even 31 in the classroom. And if you've taught in places where I've taught, I've even taught 550 people in one lesson. So, you know, it is a difficult job, and it's very difficult to engage all of your students at all of the time. But I do believe that it's possible, and it's part of our persona to be aware of students. So teenage years are a profound period of growth, change, but also opportunity. And don't forget that teenagers today navigate a really complex social landscape. Think back to your own teenage years when you were 14 or 15. It was quite different for us. I mean, we didn't have social media, mobile phones. Well, you may be much younger than me, of course, but we didn't have all of that. We didn't have to navigate those problems. It was easier. We knew the teachers in our villages, in our towns, so much simpler. Do comment if you want in the chat on this, because I think that's something we tend to forget. We're so focused on what we're supposed to be doing in the classroom. Sometimes we forget what it's like to be a teenager. Social and emotional learning is a process through which children, teens, and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge and attitudes and skills necessary to understand and manage their emotions, and they set and achieve positive goals. So that's why I think it's really important, because we want to help our learners achieve positive goals. You know, we often talk about successful learners. It doesn't mean that all our learners need to get 9 out of 10 on a test. It means that they have to be more successful at what they do. And of course, they means the many individuals in our classroom. If you ask my mother what success means, it means owning a Jaguar or something like that. It's about money. But it's not like that for us now as teachers. We want our students to be able to achieve more and overcome challenges. And our role is to support them. I can see in the chat, yes, it's so difficult nowadays for our students. It really is. I hate hearing people who know nothing about teenagers saying, oh, the teenagers today, they write over everything, they fight, they drink. There aren't that many that do that, really. Most of our kids are absolutely marvelous. And if they are doing things like that, then something went wrong somewhere. It means that they've had bad leaders as models. And those leaders could be ourselves or their parents or other people in the community around them, or even other students. But it does mean that something went wrong. And our job is to try our absolute best to fix it and help them. And good afternoon, Monica, to you too. So I think we need to show empathy with our students. We need to help them realize that we do understand what it was like. And we need to be creating activities that are memorable. We know that learning is better if what we're giving them is memorable. Again, I wanted to bring in a little thing I did with some older teenagers, 16, 17-year-olds. With these 16, 17-year-olds, I was asked to do a creative writing summer camp. Now, you may think that nobody's interested in writing anymore, and you're possibly right to some extent. Certainly reading and writing doesn't seem to be as important as it was when we were younger. But perhaps it's the way that reading and writing takes place that has changed. But if you create opportunities where learners can engage with a piece of writing and help them use their imagination. I don't mean say, imagine you're going on a journey, write something, because they can't do that. But what about something I did where I asked them all to close their eyes and I took them on a little journey. I asked them to imagine, and if you want, you can close your eyes now and imagine. Imagine you're standing near a river. Look carefully around you. What can you see around you? Look up at the sky. What's the weather like? Now look at the river. Is the water running quickly or slowly? Is it a wide river or a narrow river? Is it a deep river? Are there any animals in the river? Now imagine that somebody, don't be frightened, taps you on the shoulder. I'm not going to continue, but I took the students on a little quiet journey with their eyes closed, and I described the journey from the start to the finish without telling them what colours they saw or describing what was around them. That was what they saw in their minds. And then they had to write a narrative. They are actually taken up a mountain by a person that they don't know. But when they look in the eyes of the person, they see themselves and their values reflected there. So there's a lot to think about. The pieces of writing that these kids came up with were absolutely remarkable. And yet it didn't take an awful lot. It just took time, sitting down and giving them the opportunity to think and make choices and use their own imagination. So again, materials, when I say design your own materials, you don't need to be a wizard. You don't need to be a graphics designer. And of course, with AI these days, there are lots of things you can do quite quickly. But if you want to be humanistic, you need to be tuning in to the teenagers or your students, whoever they are, and getting them to use the knowledge they already have and imagine things and make choices. Let them be the ones that are leading the activity. In a way, you're leading it too, but they're going to be leading the final piece of writing. So there's just one example. So we need to create ways where learning is collaborative, social, and emotional. We need to help our learners be self-aware. You know, the little girl with the panic attacks, she needs to understand what is triggering these things and how she can overcome those emotions. We need to help them become strong and confident. And one of the ways to do that actually is helping them learn a language. Becoming a good listener, for example, makes you a far better speaker. It makes you more confident. Now, when I say listening, I don't mean a listening text with a test. What was the answer to number 1 or number 2? I mean, learning to be an active listener, taking time to teach students these things can only be useful for you and them in the long term. I quite often hear teachers saying, there's no time, we've got this curriculum or this program and we've got to do this and we've got to do that. Okay, it's true, you have. And that's why I think your job is very difficult. But sometimes making time for the basics or for building the base on which you're going to develop the learners is really, really useful. So thank you, by the way, for all your comments. I'll read just the last one from Maria Carla. She says she agrees that the teacher must have empathy, and we're going to be talking a lot about empathy with his or her students, but not all the teachers think that that's a good thing. Okay, that's a very good point, Maria Carla. I think empathy doesn't mean you are their friend. That's quite different. You are still the teacher and you will always be separate. It's like a mother will always be a mother rather than a friend, even though they can be friendly. So you have some responsibilities. The other thing is we need to help our learners self-manage themselves. Managing their own emotions, their thoughts and their behaviors effectively in different situations and achieving goals is really important. And it also involves managing stress, controlling impulses, or motivating themselves, setting and working towards their own personal and academic goals. I'm going to say now that quite often I'll come back to similar points under each slide because, yes, empathy will come up again and again. Choices will come up again and again too. They need to learn to understand empathy for others as well. They need to understand that word empathy, that it's not all from the teacher towards them. We're all in a learning environment, not just the students and not just the teachers. And we all need to be empathetic to each other and understanding towards each other. And we need to be able to share and agree to the ethical norms for behavior, for recognizing each other and each other's families and our school and everything in it. We also need to help them establish and maintain, I think that's quite important, and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships based on cooperation. And one way to do that is ensuring that there's lots of cooperation, cooperative learning, collaborative learning, call it what you will, in the classroom itself, which might mean taking a little bit of time to move around the desks or to think through the activities so that they're more cooperative. But these are things that will again pay off later on as they develop their relationship skills and they understand that we all have a role to play, but they also feel valued. It's important that SEL is increasingly recognized. It's part of education because it provides a foundation of safe and positive learning and enhances students' ability to succeed in school, to succeed not only in school, but also later in universities or in their careers and in life. And that's, of course, what everybody's aiming for, lifelong learning, 21st century skills, soft skills. And of course, this year is the EU Year of Skills. So all of this plays its part. It's also important because we need to make sure that negative behavior like bullying or harassment are not there. We need to find ways of improving the psychological well-being of learners. And we know that bullies, although we know they're wrong, are usually bullying because they themselves have problems too. Oh my goodness, it's so difficult to be a teacher. The good thing is we have lots of other teachers around us to support us. And that's really important, that we also think about our own social and emotional well-being. If you're tired or stressed, talk to a colleague before you go into the classroom, rather than going in that kind of, I can't go in here type mood. So implementation of SEL can be found all over the world at the moment in schools and curriculums across all grades. And it can be integrated into after school and community activities too. It's well worth thinking about that. I think one of the things we need to consider is, and I know this is very difficult for you, and I'm happy for you to write comments in the chat that perhaps disagree with me. But I think we need to consider that mistakes are really good. One of the things we often do is we take away, especially 17, 18, 19-year-olds, every time they make a mistake on an essay, for example, they lose half a mark or quarter of a mark. We don't focus on the positive. If you happen to be an examiner, for example, for one of the leading exam boards, you'll know that we tend to focus on the positives. We look at what learners can do, not what they can't do. So try and focus on that. You know, that's why we have those wonderful can-do statements from the CEFR, because we're trying to look at what they can do. Okay, let me move on. So I'll just go back and say that once more then. Mistakes are welcome. Mistakes are good. One of my favorite teachers I've been very lucky to attend LEND conferences quite often at Porto Novo. And one of my favourite teachers, who's now retired, is Tessa Woodward. Now, Tessa always used to say, I am your language waitress. She used to come in with her hands out and a tea towel and she'd say, I am your language waitress. Anything you say, I will come around and collect and serve it back to you later on. So make mistakes, because mistakes are good. We can all learn. And she would write down, I'm an inspector, by the way. I wasn't introduced as an inspector to begin with, but I'm very, very fortunate in that I visit schools around the world and I watch teachers in the classroom. That doesn't happen in Italy, although there is an Italian school that has been accredited by Equals. And I was very fortunate to be able to watch the teachers teaching. And what I love to see is when the teachers give the students something to do, they don't go around and say, have you done number 2? Where are you? Have you finished yet? No, they take their pen and their paper and they quietly go around without without catching the student's eye, just looking down and making notes of what they hear, writing down the good things and writing things that could be improved. When they put them up, they get the students to work out what's correct, what isn't correct. How can we make it better? How can we change this? Is there another way of saying it? So they're focusing on what the learners are producing to develop all the learners. So I think that's something that I really want to stress. It doesn't matter what materials you have, what books you have, if you're not monitoring effectively and giving good feedback, then you're not getting anywhere. And Tonella, I'm really pleased that that's what you say to your students too. So actually, probably all the teachers here say the same, and that's why you're here. But thank you. So a humanistic approach then, what's that mean? Now, I'm again very lucky. I'm very lucky actually altogether. One, because I'm a teacher. I'm very lucky because I'm working on an Erasmus project at the moment called HLT Digital, Humanistic Language Teaching. And we've been interviewing people who are well-known practitioners of humanistic approaches, which has been an absolute privilege. But one of the things that's struck me is I've learned more and more. And by the way, I am a learning junkie. I'm addicted to learning. That's why I teach, because I believe I always learn something in every lesson I teach. So what is a humanistic approach? A humanistic approach draws from the belief that the individual has inherent worth. That means every single student can be successful. I cannot bear hearing a teacher say, oh, that student will never go anywhere because of whatever it is. It's really important that we go into the classroom with the idea that every single student can be successful. But also remember, we don't have all the answers. It's not easy to find the right pathway for everyone. My own son is dyspraxic, not a word that you hear very often in Italy. But he's dyspraxic. It's very hard to find the right road to success for somebody who's not the same as you, because you haven't had that experience. And the only way you're going to be able to help these different learners is by asking questions and listening to them. That's the only way we can help them. And of course, getting some support from all the other people around you, including psychologists and other experts. The approach, as far as humanistic principles goes, the approach is an educational perspective. It's the way you look at education. It involves a more learner-centered classroom. I said learner and asked a question because I've come to the conclusion that a humanistic approach isn't so much a change from teacher-centered to learner-centered, but a change from both to learning-centeredness. That means we are all engaged in the learning process at the same time. All of us. We're all listening to each other. But we also can make choices about the pathway we take to be successful. So it usually involves a more learning-centered classroom where perhaps the teacher isn't always at the front, but I'm not against the teacher being at the front of the classroom. I'm against the teacher being at the front of the classroom unnecessarily and always. So position yourselves is what I call, the people who know me, it's what I call the teacher's coffee moment. I don't really mean walk out the classroom. I mean, go to the back, watch, listen, put your students into groups, watch the interaction, listen to what they say to each other, look at their body language. If you ask them to do something and you see a student turn to another student, it's he or she is saying, what do we have to do? Repeat the instruction, check the understanding, but keep your eyes and ears open, and the ones in the back of your head, teachers, at all times, because you're part of the process. You're not separate. You're not the person at the front, and you're not necessarily the knower. As we move forward into this age of artificial intelligence, you're not going to know some of the things that they might know. But that's okay, because we're part of the learning process. We're facilitators. And the aim of humanistic educators is to address all aspects of a student's development. So we come back to emotional, social, and cognitive growth. And this reflects a belief in the importance of educating the whole person. Actually, that's also why I'm a lover of CLIL, because it's part of it. It's educating the whole person, looking at different areas that develop. It's also about giving choices. Learners are given choices on how they learn, and sometimes on what they learn, and sometimes they could be given choices on whether they want to attempt something difficult or something easy. When I say choices, it doesn't mean you have to let go completely, although I do advise teachers to try not to take too much control at times. But again, let me give you an example. Again, on the high plateau of Asiago, there seem to be a lot of problems there, but lots of wonderful kids too. I was taken into a younger learners class, and I was told before I even walked in, this is the worst class in the school. I hate to say this, but I've often been told things like this. Strangely enough, it's quite a challenge for me, and I rise to it, and they're always the best class I have. But in this particular class, which was quite large, I think 29 students, we were still just post-COVID, so still masks, no singing, and etc. And we had two kids who were extremely hyperactive with attention deficit disorder, and we had other kids with different differences too. Let's say some with dyslexia, some with some family issues and behavioral problems. Quite an unusual bunch of kids, all in the same class. Teacher's nightmare, but wonderful children. So the first thing I did was I told them that they could choose a timeout. They could choose a timeout when they felt they could no longer participate. And anyone that asked me at the beginning of every lesson could be on the timeout list. That meant that for 1 minute, they no longer participated. They could walk behind me, but they couldn't disturb other people. They could bring a book and sit and read. But it shouldn't have disturbed other people. But what's really important was that timeout meant that in that 1 minute, they could not join the class again. They had to take the time out if they asked for it. It was incredible. The kids that most needed the times out, they wouldn't take them. They wanted to save them. And quite often we got right through a lesson without a timeout. But because I let everybody have a choice, and I promise you, it's worth the risk. I never had more than 3 or 4 asking for it. I was quite surprised that some of the kids that asked for a timeout were what I'd call very well-behaved children, very quiet, got on with their work. But I realized afterwards that they were stressed out and needed a timeout. And they would just bring a book. And for 1 minute, 1 minute's a long time when you're on a timeout, they'd just read. But it worked. I don't know if it would work in every class, and I don't know if it would work for every person, but it worked. And it was worth trying and worth giving the choices, because they didn't take advantage of me. They really didn't. And they could have tried, but they didn't. So I'd like to move on and tell you a little bit more about the humanistic approach and about the big daddy. I'm sure some of you have already seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He's considered, Abraham Maslow is considered the father of the humanistic approaches. But, you know, it goes back even further than Maslow, even to some of Freud's original work. But Maslow really considered what each child or person or adult needs. And if you look at this, you'll understand, I don't know how much you can see, but the first 4, the bottom parts depicted in the pyramid, are about the fundamental levels and needs of every human being. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I'm sure some of you are already thinking about children in other countries, in particular at the moment where there are wars. And you can imagine that meeting those 4 basic needs is very, very difficult in some schools. So your physiological needs would mean you would have enough food and water, comfort, a home, a bed, a roof over your head. Safety means you don't feel threatened in any way, physically or mentally, and so on and so on. Now, if you take these needs and you apply them today, or particularly during the COVID period, I'm not sure that all our kids really have the 4 basic needs answered. I actually really believe that many of our kids are no longer in a safe position. Perhaps mum or dad lost their job, or last year, who wasn't trying to save electricity? You know, these are human needs. They don't go away, and they're not just for kids, they're for us too. We all need these things. So I think you need to look at them and consider, are they in place? Do they have their physiological needs? Are they safe? Are they loved? Do they feel they belong? If they have those, do they feel that people respect them? Do they have self-esteem? And if they have all that, Maslow says, they can reach the top, which is actualization, which means the desire to become the most that one can be. Isn't that lovely? The desire to become the most that one can be. Now, I don't think that any of his ideas have changed. They're exactly today as they were all those years ago in the 1950s when he came up with this idea. In fact, I think this is more important today than ever before because kids don't feel safe. Those of you teaching 17, 18, 19-year-olds, they don't see a future, some of them. They think, the environment is going to impact them very negatively, so what's the point? So we have a hell of a lot as teachers to do to help them see that they can achieve goals and become successful. Now, I think the other role you said at the beginning, I'm not sure who it was that said it at the beginning, we talked about empathy and the role of empathy. Now, if you're not naturally outgoing or sociable, you might think that being empathetic isn't easy. It doesn't mean you have to be somebody you're not. On the contrary, you need to be the person you are. You need to be authentic. Now, Carl Rogers was a great humanist and greatly influenced by Maslow. He was an American psychologist, and he was probably one of the founding figures of humanistic psychology. And he really emphasized the importance of free will, but also of empathy. He really was the person that wanted to see this shift in a teacher-centered approach. And nearly all his principles, those many years ago, are still the principles that we hold dear today. In a Rogers-inspired classroom, the role of the teacher transforms from the source of knowledge, so not the knower, to the facilitator or guide, the person who helps spark everything off. And I think that's wonderful because we are in the classroom, the people, when somebody says to me, grammar, it's usually grammar. Can you tell me about this grammar rule? Especially with older teenagers, my answer is, well, look it up. Let's compare what everybody says and decide together. Because if I tell them, they're not going to remember. But if they're engaged in the process themselves, they probably will. He also really believed that we needed to not only empathize, but we needed to also help learners build confidence. And again, another kid said to me, I said, well, why aren't you doing your role play? I can't. Why can't you? I can't. Who says you can't? Everybody's told me I can't. I can't speak English. I'm no good at English. But who's everybody? I'm sure you can guess. The teachers, the kids around her, and her parents had told her she would never manage. And by the way, there are two types of people in the world. The ones that when somebody says you can't do it, will react and go against everything to prove they can. Io, per esempio, parlo italiano non molto bene quando sto parlando in inglese. My teacher told me I would never speak a second language. And I thought, I jolly well will. But there are lots of others, if you tell them you can't, and I'd say many more, they will believe you because you're the teacher, or they believe their parents or their friends. And we really need to show them that they can. They can, but they don't have to do big things. They can do little things. And a humanistic approach means giving choices. So we don't have to give everybody the same exercise. We can put some exercises in envelopes, and on the envelope we can have easy, medium, difficult. Let them choose which one they want to do. Let them choose and let them do the exercise. Let them feel that they are empowered and that they have choices in the way they work. Rogers believed that learning is most effective when it's self-initiated, when it's the students who want to learn. Now that's a bit difficult because most of our students are being forced to learn because they have to go to school. So we need to somehow make them feel that they want to learn. They want to come into our class. They want to do the things that will help them develop. So that obviously is another session in itself that would take forever. But we do need to think about these things. Experience is central to Rogers' educational philosophy. He suggests that experiential learning, or learning by doing, of course, is the most effective way to learn. And for language learners, this involves actively using the language in real life. Now, I don't mean they have to go out into the community because they're not going to be able to use English, but you can create little moments, role plays, and so on. But you need to set this language into context, create the context and engage them. He also focuses a lot on empathy, and he says empathy is about stepping into our students' shoes. It's about understanding their feelings and their perspectives. As educators, when we model empathy, we model empathy. That means we are leading by doing. When we model empathy, we're not just teaching a skill, we're fostering an environment where mutual understanding is the norm and where students and teachers feel heard. They feel they have a voice. So I can't emphasize, although I'd like to say empathize, enough how important empathy is. And as I said, it doesn't mean you have to be outgoing and gregarious, as you know already I am. It means you have to put yourself in their shoes. And you can't do that as a collective. You can do it for each individual. Empathy in a humanistic classroom is crucial for several interconnected reasons. The humanistic approach to education is centered on the belief that education should cultivate not just intellectual growth, not just academic intellectual growth, but also emotional and social development. And we go back to Sal. It views each student as a whole person with a unique set of experiences, perspectives, and feelings. So empathy helps in building a classroom atmosphere where students feel, go on, put the word in the chat, somebody, where students feel, let's see if anybody comes up with the word. No? Okay, well, where students feel safe, understood, and accepted. When students know that their feelings and included and loved, yes, absolutely. Very much so, I would say. So when they feel safe and understood and accepted, they know their feelings and thoughts are acknowledged. Yes, well done. Sorry, I didn't wait long enough. Heard, yes. At ease, yes. And heard, absolutely. And we know too, we want a voice too. How many of you want to have your voice heard about artificial intelligence in the classroom? We all do. We want people to hear us. We want to be able to say something about it. So empathetic, thank you everyone, you're absolutely right. Empathetic teachers can form strong, trusting relationships with their students. Does not mean friends. Strong, trusting relationships with their students. You're still the teacher. And this relationship becomes the foundation for effective learning and personal growth. It helps in reducing conflicts and promotes a supportive community within the classroom. I want you to think back to your learning. I'll wait a little longer this time. Yes, appreciated and valued, absolutely. So think back to when you were a student. Who was the teacher that you most felt inspired by and safe and that you were learning from? And what kind of teacher was it? I think this is important because we often think that all of these things mean a very sweet, kind, friendly teacher, but you can be sweet and kind without necessarily, the teacher who taught me more than anything in my life was a word I won't say, but very, very, very demanding. And she was actually my food and nutrition teacher. She was very strict, not cruel and not rude. And there you are, everybody. Isn't it surprising how students like strict teachers, but they want fair teachers and they want teachers who listen to them? You can be all of those things. The important thing is that you are authentic too, and that you are yourself. And my teacher, I used to go into the classroom and she'd say, right, next week you're going to cook for 4 people, aged 50. One has a heart problem. You're going to make a 3-course dinner. You have 1.5 hours to prepare it, and it must be on the table at 1 o'clock. And she would invite other teachers to dinner. And you had to plan everything meticulously. You had to know more or less what your shopping list would be and the cost. And you would be marked on all of those things. But she was so supportive. She made me feel special. She really did. She made me feel valued. Cooking for the other teachers. Wow, 12 years old. That was quite something. And in some ways I loathed her and hated her because she was so strict. But even yesterday when I was applying for a job, I wrote down that that's where I learned my planning abilities. So, yes, you're all writing about the teachers you know. And isn't it surprising? It's not whether you're strict or not. You don't have to be loud. You can be quiet or even silent. But really, it's about how the teacher understands you and listens to you and supports you. I'm going to move on because really that links up to respect. I think mutual respect in the language classroom for teenagers is vital. And as I said in the beginning, respect is not just about students respecting the teacher, but also the teacher respecting the students and students respecting each other. Very important, I would say. Teenagers are at a critical stage of development. So when we have them in our hands, as it were, we're going to be shaping their future. So all participants need to feel valued and safe. And each teenager is a universe of potential, They may be our future prime ministers. Do we know that? We don't know yet. They might be our future plumbers or electricians, one teacher said to me once, and I want to make sure they plumb my house well. So we need to think about the respect we show them, the example we give, the respect we expect, and the respect we expect between them. We need to help them develop their relationships. Again, we come back to cell and humanistic approaches again, because we need them to understand that everything they do is important. They need to know where the boundaries are, but they also need to be able to push them a little bit. So we need to set them well. Excuse me. I'm just going to move on one. The other thing we need to remember, and I saw quite a few of you wrote earlier about inclusivity, inclusive classrooms. I agree, inclusive classrooms are very, very important. We need to think about the way we include each and every student and how we do that. We can only do that by tailoring our approach to fit each individual's needs. And that's not easy. And I know it. And I know that what I'm saying is very, very difficult to do. So please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you have to be a wizard or a super duper wonderful teacher that spends 20 hours a day planning and 1 hour in a lesson. No. But listening to the students will help you. You don't have to be always the designer of the activities. You can ask your students to design activities for other students. I remember once we were working on a summer camp with 17, 18-year-olds, and each group designed tasks and activities around a song for the other groups. So the teacher was just a facilitator. So I'm not saying you've got to work triple or 10 times more than anybody else. What I am saying is you do need to think about the way you produce things, and you do need to think about the different emotional intelligences and interpersonal skills that students have. It's very important that they learn to behave well towards others, to understand their own feelings and to talk about their own feelings, to deal with different situations, because that's what life will be like later on. That's how they will have to approach life later on. And emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills are the currency of the future. You know, by nurturing our students today, we're equipping them for the future, not only in the world of work, but in their families and so on. University, they need to be able to understand how to work. We need to nurture emotional intelligence in teenagers with the classroom. We need to go back and look at those 21st century skills, what they mean and how we can include them in the classroom. And we need to be creating, I keep saying this, an inclusive environment, a thriving environment. And that means we might have to get cross with the other teachers and move our desks and change things around and do activities that some people don't like, but we need to be doing them for our learners, because that's what we do. We're teachers and we're supposed to be supporting our learners. So use everything you have. Talk about EDI, talk about equality in the classroom as part of your lesson. Build your lessons around it. Build the way you work around it. Get your students to open every book and find examples of discrimination in photographs. Go and have a look, because I did it with 13-year-olds last year, and it was amazing. They were going, oh, look at that, typical anti-woman. Get them to think, get them to use their brain. Integrate social emotional learning into your curriculum. Think about how you're going to do it, how you're going to tie them in, how you're going to surprise your students. And by the way, when I say social emotional learning, I tend to design my activities to connect to emotions, because I'm quite an emotional person too. But I don't mean that everything I do is wonderful. You know, sometimes it's, wow, oh, that's so heartwarming. But other times, some things are really sad or make you really angry. But it's all connecting to emotions, and I get students to express them. It's important to talk about these things. It's important to look at the dark side of humanity as well, in obviously a very sensitive way. So finally, I know I'm slightly over, I apologize. So finally, you know, why cell? Well, the impact of cell is profound and far-reaching, from improved mental health to better communication skills. The evidence is clear. Social emotional learning contributes not only to the well-being of our students, but also to the creation of a more empathetic, understanding society. So what we do in our classroom is far-reaching. It will change society around us in the future. And that's why we teachers are so important, so important. And in conclusion, adopting a humanistic approach to cell is not just beneficial, it's essential. It's about preparing our teenagers for the complexities of the modern world by ensuring they have emotional and social tools to thrive. So let's commit, all of us, to this transformative practice together. And I'm going to finish by telling you about Giovanni, a 13-year-old autistic boy who I discovered loved music, and he'd been put at the back of the classroom in a corner so that he wouldn't disturb. I asked to move the boy, and we were looking at inclusion. We were talking about the movement under Martin Luther King, and we were particularly looking at how women were treated too. And I brought in the song by Nina Simone. When I looked up, I told the children to feel the anger. You know, you don't have to sit next to me, just give me my equality, are the words, because everybody knows about Mississippi. And the kids stood up and they had to show they were angry and get involved. And this little boy, Giovanni, was jumping up and down. He was so engaged. I was so sorry that he had been excluded by putting him at the back in a corner for most of his lessons, when really he wanted to be engaged too, and he was just as able as they were. I'd like to thank you all, and thank you very much, Macmillan, for inviting me. And I will leave my slides with Romina. Actually, she already has them, and I'm quite happy to share them. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Julie. It was extremely, extremely interesting. And I really think that, you know, it's useful for the students, but also for us, for all the teachers here, because sometimes, you know, you tend not to reflect maybe on these kinds of approaches and topics. So thank you very much. Beautiful advice. I can see lots of thank you over here.
Thank you,
In
everyone.
the chat box. I'm so sorry, everybody, that there's no time for questions this time, but no worries at all, because we are always available. And sorry for my voice too. Today is a bit low. We are always available, so please do not hesitate to get in touch if you need help. I'll just leave everybody with this. I'll just wrap it up by saying that if you need the certificate, again, you can find it in the section attestati on mondadorieducation.it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Julie. It was a pleasure. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.